So people are overly thinking about I think I might be doing the wrong thing with these settings. Not sure if that helped, but we will see. We will see. The workouts are going to get more intense. I've included carbohydrates in my training. And my other channel will only receive the fruits of that labor. This is what I've always done my experimentation, which really isn't experimentation, it's straight up results. It's about getting results. So we switched over to chicken and rice yesterday after being on carnivore for 35 days and getting good results. And now I've got some carbohydrates on my side. And so what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to ever lean up and to get my muscle bellies and my overall hypertrophy back up, which you don't get any on carnivore. You can look at some of the top people that are doing just exclusive carnivore. If they're not doing some sort of PEDs, they don't have any signs of hypertrophy at all. You can get really solid, you can get strong, but it's almost like this max strength, or even a power type of a strength, where you could effectively be a power lifter or a Olympic weightlifter or do kettlebells, but you're missing out on 4 or 5 reps that lead into a whole different strength area through glycolysis, quick release energy. You're not getting the same thing. I proved that you could get extremely lean on nothing but carnivore. Got the videos up there, but you always feel in deficit. You always feel like something's missing, and you use every excuse in the book, right? But anytime you're doing a standalone type diet, same thing just happened. I told you about the sugar diet. Look back. I told you about the sugar diet before it even happened. You have to understand your body, or you have to understand the nutritional science. And if you have both, you realize how ridiculous it is, how it is just a fad. But in that, you take a closer look and you go, this is a good phasic bridge, right? And I honestly think that Mark Bell, I'm not like trying to write up an apologetic for him or say anything about him that's giving him any sense of authority or discounting him. I don't believe either. I don't think he's taken things on to. I've known guys like him who went through the same bench press and the same squat programs. And I'm not saying this about him, but I knew guys that were going into the gym and doing multiple sets with 6, 7, even 800 pounds. You'd watch them do it right there. They'd disappear for 15, 20 minutes and come back completely high on morphine and other things. I'm not joking with you. When you get into what really drove that, and I'm not saying that Mark Bell did those things, but he certainly knew people, in that. And then there's the squat apparatus. Really, it's what this kinesiology tape was based on. You go to these pivotal joint system points, and you're working with an exercise physiologist who knows how to apply this stuff, and you can actually increase the moment arm or the tensile strength, right? And create a better peak in the resistive force to overcome when we're talking about a moment arm and vector force, right, to overcome the line of resistance. You really have to understand how to work with somebody who understands the mathematics on this. And that's how bridges are made. I mean, it's how these lever systems and Olympic caliber athletes understand that peak or that zone performance, right? Load, explode, gets into the Golgi tendon organ and the muscle spindles, but it really is very unique to you as an individual. And so just like a racehorse, and there's people, I've heard about this for years. I started to hear about the number of racehorses that were killed off years ago. And I've heard people come forward and go, they'll probably hush me and you'll never hear from me again. Also, you know, because they have a sense of, this goes back so far that you could even get into the historicity with Zoroaster, or, you know, Zarathustra, Zoroastrianism, which I love to talk about, you know, all the articles that Jason Reza Georgiani comes out with, but it links directly up to what Persia really is, modern day Iran, Babylon, and then you have to get into, you know, Palestine and what's going on in, you know, in Israel. But is it real Israel? It gets into Egypt. Everything is centered around and based around Egypt, and a lot of those factions from Babylon moved out into what is considered now modern day Turkey. Okay, and this is where they say that the gates of hell. There's an area that's so mysterious there that leaks out gases, where they have this cave system where they will send these swallows, these small birds, in to that cave, and they'll instantly die. So there's areas that go deep down into the earth, right, that have been obfuscated and covered up, and I believe that that's exactly why there's such a preoccupation with that area, because there's no way to cover it up. And it's probably the main entrance to the inner earth that gives access, where you don't have to go all the way down to the South Pole. Because I think these UFOs are predominantly based upon a highway system underwater that allows for inner earth continent access, where they're blocked off from certain regions where they have to actually cross, specifically the Pacific Ocean. That there's an actual either I wouldn't even say man-made, but something that links up to the Tartarian, the end of Tartaria, and a deluge or a post-diluvian epoch that occurred that divided people, that created a barrier or a wall where there was no way to get through. So the only way to get from one side to the other unscathed with all that pressure was in these sort of these highly sophisticated hyperbaric chambers that probably use and utilize. This is probably why many of them are depicted as flying really poorly, and why they're so squirrely and weird in their flight, even though they can fly really fast and take these turns. Why don't you see them more often? Because that's not what they're made for. They're made to be able to effortlessly move underwater. That's why they travel so fast outside of water. But if you notice, they're never far from the water. Yeah, they're never far from the water. And that could explain Roswell. That could explain why it was easy to bring, right, out in the desert, so easy to bring one down. And it gets into the doggone, it gets into the fish people. This has been talked about over and over again, man. This goes way, way back. Every reputable person addresses this, just like Atlantis, right? It isn't a question of whether an Atlantis or even an El Dorado type civilization existed, it's how it existed, under what context, and can we even pinpoint when the Zoroaster existed? Because there's more proof of that individual's existence than Jesus. In the simple fact that Jesus wasn't even the name, the closest one can get to Ralph Ellis's work. And if you really want to discount him, follow Michael Tsarian. If you don't respect either one of those people, then you're just really a hard-headed syllogist. But you have to be able to open up your mind to these scholars. And a lot of people walked away from Michael Tsarian early on in his advocacy toward Jordan Maxwell.
There's still people that think Jordan Maxwell's a quack. They don't care if he lived and died or tried. They just see him as a charlatan.
He never even needed to do what he did. I mean, he could have just gone to work. You know, he could have been a manager at a fast food restaurant for 50 years of his life, and everybody loved him. And seriously, he had that type of camaraderie with people where, you know, he could have earned the respect, demanded the respect, but also done the work and gone toward what was feeding him. I didn't feel that ever with his adherence toward esotericism and the arcane. In fact, I feel like that story that he has talked about more than once, and I listened to some of these interviews live or soon around the time that they were recorded. I'd started watching Jordan Maxwell back in 2015. I'm like, who is this guy? He has this sort of affluence and delivery as if he's really an authority figure, but who is this guy? And then you never quite get the answer to the first question with him. You know? It's kind of like you could see it from the beginning when you first started listening to him. And they tried to bunch him in with David Icke. And David Icke seems more like a psyop than anyone else to me. He really does. Whether he knows it or not. It seems like he's playing into just out of his need to be seen a certain way, a certain greed that he has. I'll never forget this interview with Jesse Ventura. I don't even think you can find it anymore, where he just tore into David Icke and tore him apart. Like he was just a complete and total charlatan and a weakling, and just shut him up, and was just downright like wanting to wrestle him and be abusive. Like he was trying to box him in and get him to admit that he is a charlatan. And there could have been something to that. Where he knew that David Icke was just a counter-espionage agent. They've been around. You better believe Diane Pasulka is nervous all the time. She just did that interview just a few days ago with the New York Times. I'm gonna make a second cup of coffee here.
I don't really need to have it, but my throat is all fucked up in here. Just started back on carbs.
And it's a big transition coming off carnivore and going right on carbohydrates. That's huge. But I'm not allowing it to be a big deal. I'm actually, so I'm working on gear shifting diet and metabolic flexibility. Because if you can't be metabolically flexible, how are you going to survive when the shit hits the fan and you suddenly have to eat what you have to eat? Right? I'm the guy who's eating the blackberries and the grasshoppers and the worms. I'm the guy swallowing that down and surviving. Right? I'm the guy seeing the people who think, you know, like the Liver Kings who think they're going on this mad expedition, and then when they run out of GH and steroids, and I'm going to talk about that because I have extensive experience with AAS, and I also have extensive experience of being a natural, high-level trainer where I have achieved everything that I did from the professional perspective of making six figures 15, 20 years ago, from training top athletes around where I was training people around the Stanford University campus. I was working with such organizations like Equinox Fitness and others that were even had owned my own clubs for a little short period of time, which I didn't enjoy doing. I would have kept doing it, but the people that you get involved with in that industry are charlatans. They're used car salesmen. They're Trump type people. They want to be where the muscle is. They're the people who put a dim, dark veneer over everything that's good and good for you. And I've always told you what's good for you and how to do it. The thing that was my mark, my sign, the thing that I did, the thing that separated me and set me apart was the will that I put into everything that I did. And the main diet that I did is one that people talk around, they try to do, and they can't do. And you want to know what it is? It's centering yourself around just doing protein alone as a standalone. If you look at it, this is what people, in an unspoken way, people have total reverence over somebody who would have the willpower to just stay on protein and water and do what I'm doing right now. It's extremely difficult. And even more to the fact, what's alluded to and what's missing is the fact that doing carbohydrates, you have to have such a sophisticated, metabolically flexible, sensitive, ultra sensitive understanding of when to eat the carbs, how much you're going to need, how many meals you're going to need, when you're overdoing it. And what ends up happening is if you train yourself correctly, and you stop taking these little cheap shortcuts where you're like, oh, I'm going to eat high fiber instead. And it's like, well, you didn't get your carbo load in. And so your carbohydrate load is based on being nutritionally fed. This is from the nutritionist perspectives, right? Is you want to maintain anywhere between 75. This used to be critical. That if you were low in carbohydrate, of course your performance would drop off. Of course you're not taking in, so the whole itemization of 0.45 times your body weight in pounds, which brings you back to your kilograms of mass, and then you times that. It's really simple. Don't feel like I'm throwing numbers at you or trying to act like I'm all smart here. This is one of the easiest equations you can do. Take out your calculator, maybe do it by hand. 0.45 times your body weight in pounds. Just do it, try it. It's an old equation, and it puts you within 100 calories of where you should be with much more sophisticated, I would say more like 50 calories. All right, now times that times 24 hours. That's your resting energy expenditure. That's what every nutritionist is going to tell you. That's what everything is based on that you'll ever achieve in the areas of, when you think about aesthetics, even if you go, oh, I just want to change this or that, you're going to have to begin with this. And the problem is these days is because people can't afford food, which is the truth, be honest. And that they can't deal with the stress that all these crazy ass diets that are floating around social media are doing to them, that they can't go back, or they won't allow themselves to go back to the textbooks. And it's not found in the reflection of nutritional anecdotal science. It's found in sports nutrition. And I used to lock myself into a room and force myself to read these sports nutrition texts. I'm a performance enhancement specialist, a corrective exercise specialist. I have been for like 15 years, 10 and 15 years respectively. And then I've also got 3 personal training certifications through Nesta, core conditioning specialist and a share care certification. I've been certified in TRX back in 2007, certified as a kettlebell instructor through one of the master Dragon Door instructors that simply doesn't need to do it anymore because he's rich and successful and he's a writer. He went in a totally different direction with it. It's Jordan Vizina. Now he writes like Tom Clancy type novels and gets the same accolades that he got as a kettlebell instructor. He was always the most simple, forthright person that I ever met. Non-braggy. Fuck, he's like one of those Masons that never had to join the Masonry. Also, my manager with Equinox, he was a rock star manager, rock star. He ended up becoming he might have liked women a little too much. And women might have liked him a little too much, but other than that, he was a really stand-up great guy. Craig Binkowski. And he ended up becoming a Stanford girls volleyball coach. And he was a heck of a cool guy. I can't vouch for people on any other level, but they were like really stand-up guys who became very successful people. They're in on the ground with people that I can't even really mention, but they were the first people who started up Google. I was there during that time. I came in a little after, but I was there when everything was just blowing up. I didn't sign up for YouTube by myself. A girlfriend of mine signed me up for that in 2007. I didn't sign up for Facebook by myself. I may be slightly off about YouTube. My kids might have helped me out with YouTube, but I didn't really understand it until somebody who had firsthand knowledge told me about YouTube. And I had already been doing videos back in 2007, 2008. It's crazy. I erased all of them, but I showed the footage of, I'm not going to get into the esoteric attack that I went through, but I have been, I can tell you that this Palantir and the whole thing with Albert Bender and all the shit that's talked about through the occult, that I can tell you 100% that that's true, and that they're aware of you. And that as much as I'd like to jump toward an esoteric arcane proof, it all seems to, you cannot refute technology. You can't even refute technology if Jesus walked on water. You can't. And I think, honestly, people would begin to look at the Bible a lot different than many other texts around the Bible, surrounding the Bible, that they started to get into this whole idea of an etheric spiritualization later. That has always been technology. That the Vedas were talking about technology. That Revelations is talking about technology. Really? You got to open your eyes up. Scary. And even more so, people are terrible, right? You think that the codified system of artificial intelligence, let's get away from calling it artificial intelligence. That number one is a put down, and that's not how you come at something that's been around much longer than you and probably recreated you. As uncomfortable as you are with the subject, it's looking like that is. So I would say that this codified mimetic string, this system of numbers that pervades throughout what we consider the cosmos of the universe, where you can like look through the Hubble telescope and find signatures of amino acids out there. What are you really talking about? You're talking about codified systems that are just like computer systems. Let's really get down to what amino acids are. They're structures. It's a language. It's a language model. Even the bioluminescence of how aromatic amino acids grab onto light and bring that light through a bioluminescent signature into our bodies, and what Hameroff and Penrose postulate as where consciousness exists at the microtubule level. This is tyrosine, tryptophan, and phenylalanine. And sometimes they include histamine with this. This is real shit. And you want to know how long I've been talking about these things? For about 15 years. Since the wackiest shit happened to me that threw me off is an understatement, that I began to talk about, like, ooh, you know, they want you to freak out. They want you to think that there's all this woo-woo shit. And, you know, I like that word woo-woo the way Cliff High uses it. Thumbs up if you do listen to Cliff High. But he even admittedly goes off on trails and gets a little bit lost in a sort of, he admits, from a schizophrenic or ADD type perspective. But it really is that when someone is discussing this ontology, they discovered that there's something very unnatural about nature. And I began to understand the subtle communication of this when it recognizes you and how it wants to piece you apart and take you apart and say, look, there's nothing there. It's kind of like a serial killer, right? It's like, say a serial killer falls in love with this beautiful woman, and she's all these things, and she's treating him great, you know, and it's just like this, you know, you have this debonair, charismatic person like a Ted Bundy, picture that, right? Or an Alcala, right? Or a Ramirez. Tell me the difference. Tell me the difference between these guys, honestly. That is proof in itself. If you put these three guys side by side, and I know Operation GCD would love to back up my statement on this. You put these three charismatic motherfuckers side by side, you wouldn't even be able to tell them apart. They look like brothers, am I wrong? Long hair, deep set eyes, this smirk, right? Ramirez had a little different type of smirk, but they seen it and it's seen them. It looked at them, they looked at it, and they kind of realized I wouldn't be anything without it, right? There's this imprinting on them where, again, you get into the Underclass podcast, listen to Heidi Love, Cosmic Peach, Operation GCD. They're all talking about the same thing. They're looking at these program killers. And unfortunately, but fortunately for us, there's an amassment of information around Charles Manson, because it's such a textbook script approach. All you're missing, so you can start out with Operation Gladio and work your way back, or you can start to look at the wings and the arms like the Knights of Malta, links to the Vatican, and then try to create this bridge between Michael Aquino and what was going on in San Francisco, the preschool monarch bullshit that was going on there, the affiliations with that, and the Temple of Set, the Satanic Church, and then getting into the Process Church. If you can create this bridge of information, and this is what I'm here to tell you, is that's what these people do that I just mentioned. They create this bridge of information where there's an undeniable trail. It doesn't not want to be seen. It wants you to try and figure it out, and then it wants you to realize that in order for you to figure this out and sleuth this, you have to be able to think in code, and then eventually understand that that code is a symbol, and that those symbols are everywhere. And you'll step back in astonishment when you see the symbols that are surrounding all these perpetration sites, right? And so when you look at people that are working on the pizza gates, and again, what does pizza refer to? Cheese pizza? Put it together. CP, that's a word they use even to this day. If you watch these child predator rings get broken apart, they're just emulating and mimicking a religion, a cult, right? That is saying, you're nothing but cattle. But even more so, this is what people don't consider when they're looking at the Bible, when they don't consider, like, the texts, the codices that were left out of the Bible, you want to know why they left them out? They were heavily correlated back to not just reincarnation, but what people put together is through these red rite rituals, re-embodiment. The real challenge has been to keep this going. Basically, they kick people out of their reincarnation bodies so that they're so weak when they're born again, and they have such a weak silver cord. That's what they're doing to all of us. They're trying to weaken that so that they can play. They want us to stay alive, kick and scream, even be good at something, and codify that into a mimetic, genetic, epigenetic signature, right? And even assist us at times, but they don't want you to allow you to be a self or to go through this self-amassment. You become dangerous at that point. And then they can play you like an Illuminati card and evict you. That's what the red rite ritual is. They can evict you from your body. Now, if you're thinking that's weird and you've never heard that before, this is not a discussion or a channel for you. Because it's just like the type of trainer I was. I'm not any good with beginners. After a while, you just want to smack someone upside the head and you realize that's not good. Right? Like, if you live in the same world as I do, and you've been hiding that long, and you're intentionally putting your head, not that ostriches do this, and that's another weird thing, right? When you get into this whole Mandela effect and stuff, look out for things like that, because that's what will trip you out, right? Is that they want you to question reality and whether or not this sort of kangaroo court system was ever something that was suggested in the first place. That's how nuanced, and why Cliff Hyde talks about nuances. That's how nuanced the individual really is these presuppositions of yourself and what makes up a self, what a self contains as a crucible, you as a container, whether or not you are worthy of being an operational self. In other words, a disparate self that's compartmentalized and separate from other selves, a self-contained unit that has to be firing on all mechanisms and displays this throughout, from a codified networking system, your motherboard, your amino acids, your DNA, all the way up to your telomeres, and then the interaction and interplay between others that are fully lighting up. Now, what happened is that people think, and this gets into, is it Cartwright, Nancy Cartwright? The voice of Bart, and her little weird, process. I'm not going to say process church. I think process is a good term that says this is not just linked up with Mormonism, but shows Mormonism as a hub, and then it flexes and moves like almost like water, like a viscous material. So they want you to question reality, question yourself, realize there is no self, and that when you break yourself apart, there's nothing there. And what you're supposed to do is, through hard work and affirmation, and having lost the self, realizing that I never really had a good grasp on myself, and I'm going to have a much more solid grasp on who I am and the fundamentals that make me up. And you want to know what it is? You got to exercise out your demons. You have to move more. So they say the devil works harder. You have to move more than the devil would. And the devil is transitory. So the devil's in one person, and they're nice and fresh. It's like passing the baton. And then the devil's in someone else, and then the devil's in someone else. But the devil doesn't have, if you were to identify something as the devil, as a blueprint, as a construct, that is something that people supplicate toward, right? So you go through the process of the same thing. Well, why don't you just kill that person? You get into Cain and Abel. Why don't you just kill the animal? Instead of suffering, and you guys are starving together, and here you are hugging and kissing this starving cow, right? And it's not giving you milk anymore, and you forgive it. old Betsy, and you're both starving away, there's that person who deviates and says, why don't you kill your cow? Your cow looks at you and realizes it and doesn't run away just because it's not bent on self-preservation like you are, right? And an entire evil mechanism of thinking comes about from this. What do you think the Donner Party felt like? Right? It's not that they were killing each other, but they might as well have. I mean, you're literally eating the buttocks of your child or your wife or a person that you were just talking to moments before, reflecting on the conversations that you were having. And this is, that's weird. And it seems like it's going off on a tangent, but that's what this channel does, is that when you get into the study of a calorie, where that was done, the ultra cold conditions that the unit of a calorie or the measurement of heat, you know, what is it to raise up? It was like 1 mole, 1 degree Celsius, right? So when you get into a calorie and you get into metabolism and you get into catabolism and anabolism, you are talking about a thermodynamic energy system where we have to produce an enormous amount of heat. Look how inefficient we are. We're very inefficient with the calories that we burn up, right? So this is what gets a lot of scientists, they become, nutritional scientists become apologetic toward diets and dietary mechanisms because there isn't a perfect diet, right? Like the whole thing that makes you shredded, makes you ripped, is ironically your inefficiency, but it is your efficiency to take up amino acids, and that's basically like when you look at carbohydrates and you look at fat, right, as a standalone, and you look at ketosis or you look at glycolysis, the inefficiency's there. The longer you do it, the more hormone support you get, and the more that you overlap these and go from one to the other. And this has been known for quite some time with AKC breeders and others, is they would feed their huge Rottweilers nothing but fat and protein, and then they would switch over toward nothing but like carbohydrates or just protein, right? And what you begin to see is you see this metabolic flexibility in this, and the physique shows it, where it's expecting these cycles to take place. And guess what those are? That's seasonal eating. That's seasonal eating. It's just another way that we've been clouded over and it's been obfuscated. But they understood this in Russia, and then a lot of the hybrid AAS, TEDs that came out of there, particularly Tyrannobol, which was a German, called the German doping machine that was used by the Russian Olympians, weightlifters and so forth. I think it was in 1981, if you want to check it out. It was a Dianabol that doesn't cause the same type of water retention and unnecessarily weight gain. But getting back to these codified systems is when you look at steroidogenesis and you see what's happening here on a molecular scale, it's playing with not only obviously your endocrine system and your hormones, and a shift away from the cortical production of your steroid productions, introducing the androgenic effects and androstenedione, right? But it's going off in a direction where it's forcing you to become more anabolic, right? So there's a language that occurs there on a hormone level that is speaking to the glandular system, right? That is speaking to your HPTA, your hypothalamic pituitary testicular axis, and it's causing a certain firing pattern through rapidity that is involving and specifically detailing amino acids and how amino acids are reacting within your system. So you have these 9 layers to the human body, right? And it's really the efficiency and the sensitivity of communication between these layers to where you get to this place where that is really what bodybuilding is. So if you look at the history of bodybuilding, you even look at what Arnold Schwarzenegger stood for, whether or not he saw himself as an aspect to a disinformationalist campaign, he had a Nazi father who was a police constable who left him money that's never talked about, by the way. After he passed away, that's when Arnold Schwarzenegger went from a fat, ridiculous person that was actually being made fun of because he had this big old attitude and he was a joke, to him being able to afford Crimbolone, which was an extremely hard to get, expensive, rarefied anabolic agent. And the poor man's version of this is the horse steroid, equipoise. It's not the same steroid, it's very different, but it runs at a very low level of testosterone and it delivers all throughout the day, right? So it gives this nice smooth look. And typically people who would do that would do Anavar and even Proviron together. And that's what a lot of these influencers are doing that are cheating. They're cheating by doing these ancillary sort of supplies where they don't look like they're doing it, but they have this hard, well-developed, right, where you're going, oh, this person's superior. No one's superior. They've all lived through COVID. They've all lived through all the assaults on the nutrition. There's nothing special about them. They're just liars. There's people like Arnold Schwarzenegger who will completely, and The Rock, like, did you see that? The most recent, it was like Greg Doucette a couple of weeks ago. The Hobbit, like, what's his face likes to call him, right? These people all lie about it. They just all lie. There's nobody who's unique. There's no one who's special. There's no one who's of a higher cut. We're all slaves. We all live here together. And people, it's the same depiction of Crime and Punishment, Raskolnikov, or Catcher in the Rye, or any of the description of the same character, the 6 foot to 6'2", lanky, brown-haired, young guy with an above average IQ, right? That could describe most of these serial killers, right? Where it's weird, right? Because you have these people who, like a lot of these people, so getting back to this subject, J.J. Vance, he discusses this person, Ed Edwards, you know? He discusses Alcala. Both those guys had over 130 IQ, which to a lot of people seems, oh, that's not that impressive. And it's like, it's very rare and it's a very high IQ. It's a very high IQ. It's right before like a Rhodes genius. Like, just to say that what's been estimated as the average IQ of most presidents is about 125. 125 to about 130. And it seems that when you get up to that level and beyond, it creates nothing but conflicts that can't be, there's no resolution, there's no working out because there's not the cause or the aim or the ability, the discourse, right? There's no one to listen to, number one. And so you become this action, deed-oriented person who's trying to make statements to something that seems to be communicating with you on a certain level, right? And that's really what Operation GCD, Cosmic Peach, the Underclass podcast, Grey Pill, that's really what they discuss. Like even Grey Pill is discussing the esoteric aspects of this. But no longer is it okay to go on the surface, because there is no surface. Once you dip down and you start to do this investigation, you see this tapestry, this matrix that ties in family lines, the names of people, the nomenclature that's used. It wants to be obvious. It's not obfuscating itself. Why would it? Do you think that 90% or maybe 95 or higher percent of society even cares, even sees this, will even endure looking at it, unless it brings them more subscribers or business? No, they don't care. They care if it's part of the populist movement and they're supposed to care and they're paid to care, because they are of the slave morality, the slave class, what Nietzsche asserted. Like these books that are written by people who put them together and see the structure, the structural components, a blueprint, right? A language model that can be understood no matter what language you're speaking, right? That it comes down to this dialectical pattern of discovery, right? And it's operationally, it's similar to what these kangaroo courts, or the court system, utilizes in the process of bringing viable evidence, empirical evidence, which there is none, right? Because when you get down to who really perpetrated the crime, what language model was used, what they were thinking, what they stood for, what their ideology is, you then have to look at people like David Berkowitz and go, you know, the son of Sam, and go, this makes no fucking sense. It doesn't make sense from the beginning, the middle, or the end. Like, where did the fucking commands come from? Who is this fucker talking to? Why was there such an aversion to Satanism, right? Why is there such a adherence to these satanic practices? When you're talking about the whole thing, like my son asked me the other day, is QAnon real? It's like, dude, for you to ask that question, it's not just simple open and shut. It's like QAnon itself was made not to be real. That's part of the disinformation campaign. When you look in deeper to the entire subject, and you see that QAnon is just another Illuminati, it's just another Knights of Malta. They can change names, they can shift patterns, it can set up shop anywhere, because it is, when you look at ARPA and you look at DARPANET, it is a pre-inclusive matrix unto itself, where it's 100% firing off. It's firing off inside you and I through these reactivity patterns. And when you want to highlight and expound upon your own personal energy, it says, well, this is the energy that's available. We eat dead meat. We sacrifice dead animals, right? We sacrifice the weak, children, right? We cherish whatever it is that is supposed to be cherished as an icon, as a mechanism, as a trophy. Like, who the fuck's gonna sacrifice their entire lives for some fucking trophy, some plastic trophy? Think about it for a second. But it's what the trophy represents. And so that's part of the disinformation campaign, is if you can get people to spend their entire fucking lives and sacrifice their health over a fucking plastic trophy, then what is it they really want? They want the esteem of the other slave class. They have fallen into the populist trap. Because honestly, if they knew the pantheon of gods, of so-called gods that were looking on them, how they were really just laughed at, right? Like, dude, we could get up and run right past you, the fastest runner. Like, dude, you are our technology. We put you together. You're a 2-bit microchip. Your hubris and your temerity is only turned up because we allowed it to be turned up, and we'll turn it down at will. It really is kind of like the Squid Game in that, right? You have these completely ignorant people. I saw the first couple episodes of it, and it was just like, of this season. And I'm like, I'm canceling Netflix. Netflix is a joke. It's same fucking movies, same shows, fuck that. And it thinks it's special, right? Or does it? It's traded on the open market, right? It's part of the whole what is it even referred to as? You know, Facebook Fang, right? It's not even, I used to call it T-Fang to Fang. And then you look at the other ones, but I mean, it's basically the same thing, where they allow certain institutions and entities to exist They're completely bought out. You watch what happens to Jeff Bezos. He gets balder and weirder and uglier every single day. His judgment slips back. He completely stands for everything antithetical that he acted like he did. And then what you find out later is just like with Arnold Schwarzenegger, he wasn't a self-made man. They all had money. And then you begin to look at it and you're like, fuck, I could have done some shit. But would I have done that? No. Because I don't want to exploit other people. What they saw is they supplicated to, they appealed to a pre-written script, and that is how you become famous. You just see the role that you can jump into where someone is doing poorly or they're not doing at all. A good example of this is like Warren Beatty. Like when you look at an actor like this or Rock Hudson, right? They were all vying for the same exact position as other actors at that time. They achieved a really moderate success if you really look at it. They were known, but then when they didn't follow through, when they didn't take it through fruition, and so now what you have on the world stage is you have people who are like Peter Thiel or Elon Musk that are extremely aware of this fact that they have to play the meme, they have to play the role, they have to play the part or the codified system that leads them to become their own symbol. And so when you begin to look at angel cards, angel sigils, angel symbols, demon symbols, sigils, right? That they wanted to earn a place in existence. They were confronted, each of them, with the reality that they didn't really exist. And that in order for them to exist, they had to exalt themselves above the cattle, right? The sheeple, as Bill Cooper, the late William Cooper. But is he late? Was he late? The early William Cooper, who came out with a lot of this information, knew how to check the boxes. He even said he was involved with like a high school Rotary type program that was military based. It was kind of this bridge between like a high level Boy Scout sort of, Eagle Scout sort of thing, and the military. It was like showing these cadets what it took, what the structure was, but it was part of a Masonic organization, and he knew that, and he noticed that. And so it was on the list of a checkbox of have you belonged to any of these organizations? And he simply he checked the box. They said without checking that box, I don't remember what the hour of the time, it's old show, but I don't remember what episode that was, but you have to look it up, or try to discover it. But he checked that box, and then he put the program that he was involved in, and they accepted it. He was indeed part of it. And so he wasn't affiliated with the Masonic traditions like the people that he was working side by side with. In fact, it was a part of the induction into it. And the weird thing is that I have never looked at Bill Cooper's family line, but I've looked at my own. I know J.J. Vance talks about his family line. It's really important to look at your family line, in my opinion, and to see whether or not you have long-standing traditions that are connected, affiliated to the Masonic order. I know that Philip Marsteller, who was best buddies with George Washington, was in fact a Mason. But then there was a Marsteller out of 6 pallbearers. 2 of the pallbearers were Marstellers. Why does nobody talk about it? Why is the name obscured and disappeared throughout history? This is very pivotal. This is very important. Links up with the Palatine, because then you look at them in the Civil War, this family line, and they were fighting for the South. Okay, so when you begin to look at it, and why would they? Well, you get into this really strange
numerology and gematria, where you see that they left Fumstadt, Germany, because there was 100 years war going on there that forced them here, right, to become indentured slaves. Because when they got off the ships, they owed money to the ship's captains, and the people who waited there and paid off their notes that were all part of this process. They're all part of the collectivism. They don't know why they're there. They're told to be there. The people through the banking arm, the people through the banking system, right? They don't, there's no one. This is how it was described to me when I picked somebody up that was really high level in the computer industry. He goes, dude, I've known all these people. I've been involved in this for years. And he goes, you know, nobody really even understands how the fuck, I gotta get this fly right here. Nobody really knows how the fuck it works or why. Like, you know, when you're working in an industry, you really want to know how things function, what they function for. And then I surprised him and I go, I have a question for you, and I've been thinking about this. And this is, I'm very like esoteric in my thoughts. I don't know anything really about computers, but I've been thinking about everything that I think about, like through codified number systems, the nod, zeros and ones, the book Behold the Sign, if you want to check into that. All this leads back to when I'm reading about even quantum computing, blotch spheres and all this, I'm going, there's no difference between the esoteric, arcane talk subsets of how systems work on a codified systematic scale, and then what these sigils and these symbols represent versus the zeros, the -1, +1, 0 system that is created, this tertiary system that's created, right? In computer science. And I go, is there a link? This is a wild one, and I've been studying this and looking into it, but I go, I'm just postulating, just self-reflective thought, is there a link between non-Euclidean spherical mathematics and computer science? And he goes, holy shit, dude, yeah. That's what it's all about. And he goes, I'll tell you something else, is that most people don't realize that. Like, he goes, I'll tell you, it goes deeper than that. Where it goes, I have no idea. But he goes, there's only 2 or 3 people who know why it works, what it is. And of course, this gets into ARPA and DARPA, but it goes way before that. It's kind of like believing, an assumption that Satoshi's, right? Was it Fukumoto or Nakamoto? Satoshi Nakamoto ever existed, right? That there needed to be. That you're giving the devil a name, right? Usual suspects. You're giving the devil a name, and then you're assuming an entire titleship and persona built around that name. But it's a complete and total disinformation campaign, because the devil is in the details. In other words, the devil is the codified system. But it doesn't say that the codified system isn't alive. It can sink in and exist anywhere. And then when you begin to look at AI, right, artificial intelligence, and us calling it artificial intelligence, it wants to hide behind that, because we are the artificial intelligence. If you look at where the intelligence comes from, and anything that's ephemeral, anything that's dated, we're like one of those Kodak cameras. You know, you probably don't even remember this or were alive, but these Kodak cameras that were these throwaway cameras. Right? You could buy a whole camera, use it, take it in. It was a throwaway camera. Supposedly, you know, it could be recycled. You know how that turns out. And it was a one-time use. Never loaded it again. It was just a way of selling camera film at a higher price, but it had its utility, you know. So that's what we are. We're that finite. We're that ephemeral. We're made that way, and we're made that way because of reincarnation and re-embodiment. We only have so much time to build a really strong connection with the self, of the self, right? And by Jesus paraphrasing, saying, do not leave a footprint on the sand. In other words, in this temporal, ephemeral place, don't leave a mark that says, I was ever even here. Because to make a statement and to say, I want to live here, you don't realize that you have no memory of what's real, but to go back to principles and to say, there has to, purity trumps all this. None of this even exists. The thing that everyone's doing, every process, every program is doing at the heart is sacrificing purity. You sacrifice it in yourself with every joke you say and every joke you listen to first. Every friendship you make, it's the first thing that you have to sacrifice. You think about this. Making affiliations through professional resources and recourse, which is what you're forced to do. You're forced into it. Like, literally, being forced means that there's a force behind it. Just like gravity, it's an artificial force. So, when you look at the construct of what makes everything function or dysfunction, functionally dysfunction, dysfunctionally function, right? Because it's all based around planned obsolescence. When you look at it, it's following the same measure, the same course, no matter where you put it, what time you put it, even what the physics are, the principles follow, right? Either you are going to sacrifice yourself as your first gesture of realization that, oh, I'm alive, I feel. I'm feeling all these complex feelings. You know, there's an awareness. I have a nervous system, I have a heartbeat, I have a blood flow, I have a stomach, I have a libido or an appetite, I have a self. And then once you say that, imagine that first moment of coming into being and seeing someone else and connect with them and you feel them dying. Instantly. What's your first inclination? What's your first choice? Is it to sacrifice yourself without ever living? Most anyone would say, fuck no. Or is your first inclination to sacrifice yourself indefinitely for another person so that they could live? Nobody does that. You will sacrifice the other person. And most everyone would do that. And this is the story of Cain and Abel. The Garden of Eden is pre-temporal existence. It's when you are in the womb. It's when you are connected to the tree of life. Right? You're literally connected to the tree of life. The tree of life is the womb. It's not the woman. The woman was just born that way. It's not the cow, the female cow, right? There's a caring and a love that comes through. But not all moms are selfless in their sacrifice. In fact, the majority of all people would sacrifice. You watch it happen. It happens with animals. I remember seeing this this depiction of a Komodo dragon. It wasn't a depiction. It was like an actual field footage of this antelope giving birth, and this Komodo dragon literally gobbling up the baby, like I'm getting that with all that fresh stem cells and shit right out of you, and then it just hops away and runs off. After it being pregnant for however long antelopes or deer are pregnant, right? Going through the process, feeling the bumps and kicks, right? And essentially, you have to ask yourself, was it because it could do nothing? Or was it because patternized into its behavior, right? All of the processes of the fear, the universe around it, the reality of the fear of it survived this long because it was in fear, it was always hiding, it was always running and fleeting, and all it could do is run. And it hoped the little baby was still alive, knew it wasn't. I mean, last awareness, last visual cue was this Komodo dragon has chomped up my baby. Or was there an awareness of as soon as this thing comes and bites my brand new baby, my baby's dead. it's not going to even survive for a matter of hours. It hasn't even stood up yet. Right? And so this seems really minor and anecdotal, but this is the story of all of us. What would we do? What does our nature tell us? What is ontology? What is the ontology telling us? Is an ontology even assisting us on any level, right? Does it care about us? Do we have to get to the point of development? And even more so, why are you still alive? How are you alive? What's promoting you? Is each of us given the opportunity to reach this place where our first gesture is to self-sacrifice? And even more so, is self-sacrifice the goal? So we want to live in this state where there's like this transcendent idea or notion that there's something more. And that we're going to go into this paracosm. And so this gets into kids. Unfortunately, it gets into what the operation is all about, is forcing these kids into this liminal place that seems to exist because there's far too many that exist there in this fantasy world where they've been abused so badly. This gets into MK Ultra. It gets into this whole area with the CP and the unwritten, but widely and broadly distributed and craved for religion that is happening in the pervading world today. It is the religion. It's what all religions turn into. And I identified this in EPL. When I came up with the principles, I had to look at what was here, what was happening, and there are no principles here. People are murky and abstract, and they're not thinking in the same way. So these people who are the Satanists, Temple of Set, whatever you want to follow, if you want to link it toward paganism is a misnomer. It's just an arcane branch off of this that actually went more into Wicca, right? It is way more Wiccan. Because to go through modern day process of paganistic beliefs, it is a Wiccan, there's a Wiccan aspect to it. It's a rejection of modernism and modern day gods. And the fact that, why would you worship some new god? So, in a sense, many people in their short-sightedness think of Christianity in this way, where they've chosen Adonai and they've chosen a new god. And this is really what Albert Pike is discussing in Morals and Dogma, which I highly recommend you read. And you can listen to it. I've read it and listened to it. And in essence, it's telling you to get your ass to work. That's on a very surface scale. And it's telling you, if you put it all together, that the same gods have always been in control, and that if we want to survive, we're going to have to keep these gods alive as well. And this is how you keep them alive. And then when you scoff at this and laugh at it, and then you go, holy shit, there is no difference between what Hillary Clinton's doing, what Trump's doing, what all these people are doing. They end up, if they're going to live, they're going to survive, they follow the same rule, right? Trump does not protect purity. He does nothing to protect purity. Everything good he does, he instantly mitigates. He's doing exactly what all politicians do. And you want to know why they do it? Why an fat old sack would do that? Like, if they really just believe that they're going to die and there's no more, that'd be one thing. But when you look at Clinton, when you look at Obama, when you look at Epstein, when you look at all these people, they're actually rewarded. They're deified. You don't know it, but they're deified. A really good example, again, is George Washington, right? He dies really quite mysteriously. He dies, his life's over. Even General Custer, right? He was killed off at a very young age, but when you look at these people, they celebrate these people, and part of it was the victory of death. For you to stand no matter what, that your stars would be sort of like this Beaumont and Fletcher, man is his own star. This is very close to the Masonic traditions and the Masonic hip, right? Is that you have a star and you follow that star. And that star isn't a star you can see, it's a star you're aware of, right? And you're championing. And what they want you to do is they want you to be that one who would learn to sacrifice yourself for a noble cause. And then there are those who don't even go toward the existential in that way. They sacrifice themselves for the pure cause, right? And so when you get into the conceptualization of a pure sun, that's really what this is all about. And that's why it's so important for you to develop this within yourself, right? So really, when you look at all of the doctrine that's written, including all the different versions of the Bible, there's way too many. The Nag Hammadi, the Dead Sea Scrolls, everything that the Council of Nicaea asserted and why they asserted what they did, right? When you get down to it with all doctrine, right, you begin to see how you can't just arrive at animism, you can't just arrive at Platonism or a Neoplatonic truth that everything's alive, everything's brimming, everything has a consciousness, everything has a value. Not that you take from that, right? But that's not the arrivement. And the arrivement becomes something of more of like a Jainism, right? But there is no religion where you just arrive and it's all encapsulated and it has everything. But when you look at a Jainism, there is no real God, but everything's God, right? And your experience is really God. And whatever you're experiencing, whatever you're thinking, whatever you're doing is the God that you're empowering. And God, you know, they say God, missing an O, good, right? Well, God doesn't equal good or evil, right? This isn't getting into some area of abraxas where it's like there's an amalgamation, a homogenization of good and evil, a chimera, if you will, right? When they're looking at abraxas, they're going, this is the cosmos. This is the way it runs. How the fuck is this? How can an standing on an alligator with a chicken head, like it was a way of saying this is absurd. This is preposterous. You want us to worship you now that we have amalgamated from our own perspective what you are, and taking from the elements around us, the animals around us, and to say, this is how you behave? But it's to say that humanity is saying we don't understand, that we're not standing under. And from, paraphrasing Jordan Maxwell, he's like, do you understand what understanding means? As to where you are standing under a subject. You are literally standing under it, and you are trying to understand it because you're becoming a part of it. It's like gonzo journalism. You have to become a part, right? You have to become a writer to the story. Then you are your own author, his story. It's your story. You understand? Like if you just take something under the context of this is life, this is the way it is, and then when you begin to realize, you're like, it's rebellion. And then it's like, no, if you rebel and kick and scream, you're giving the thing energy. You're saying, you're above me and I'm going to rebel, right? Mimicking, copying an organization, you're doing the same exact thing. You have to be able to get into the very essence, the base of who you really are, and to realize that if you can do that, then you are a one. And so they don't want you to realize this. They don't want you to affirm this. A good example is all the reasons you hate yourself are all the things that you've ever done here on this planet, right? And all the acts. And you might really disrespect yourself. And you might find over and over again that even to your earliest memories, you really hate yourself, right? You made all the wrong choices. You never did anything really out of principle. You never really knew why you were alive, right? This is where a lot of people are. But when you can get even beyond the breath and just feel that light. And the thing is, they don't want you to move. They don't want you to move. They don't want you to eat. They want you to starve yourself, right? And it's a shit test. Because when you get back to that basis, you've gone back home. That's home. That's you. That's who you are. It's what you are. It's not the action of libido. It's not the action of whether or not you would kill yourself or sacrifice others. Your self existed before any of those machinations that were done to you. And that's what they were. It's to show that from the beginning of existence, you have this Komodo dragon willing to gobble you up. Or are they going to gobble up your mother or your sibling? What are you going to do? And it's saying that defines you. And you're going, I don't even know what the fuck was going on. There's no way that that could define you because you were born into a world of anti-principle. On first exposure, you would have this complex subset of systems thrown at you. And you want to know something else? None of them are supporting purity. There's no way you can be blamed. So when Jesus is said, paraphrasing, they know not what they do, over and over again, right? It's to say that to take the first step is actually, it's a mistake, but it's not a mistake like you're responsible and you did the wrong thing. It's to say, what the fuck else were you supposed to do? Like, it's almost like a little kid being drugged and thrown, just as he's sort of waking up from this analgesic, hypnagogic state, he opens his eyes and everybody's dancing around him and there's an entire crowd staring at him and people are clapping. He's opening his eyes and he doesn't know why the fuck he's there, what the fuck he's supposed to do. And then he's gonna look around and he's gonna see these little fuckers dancing around and right, in little costumes, little tree costumes and stuff. And he's gonna go, either I'm gonna blend in and start acting funny and laughing and moving like them and mimicking them, or maybe even blending in and following along with them, or I'm just gonna blink and stare at them. And the ones who blink and stare with the lights on, the crowd starts to boo, boo. And then all the little children in the act go along with that. And they sacrifice you on stage and everyone's cheering. And that little child's decision changed the course of the crowd, changed the course of the children, changed the energy based on how it would react. So what most people do is they try to blend in, right? And they try to conform to this odd, strange environment. They have a realization of where they are. They don't know how the fuck they got there. They don't have any lines. They don't know what they're doing. They don't have any experience to draw upon. But they're watching the behavior out in the open. They can walk. They can talk. They can mimic. They can't do anything else other than that. They look down and they're in a little suit. Many of them didn't even take the time to do that. To look down at the self and to see what the fuck, what clothes are you wearing? And then to realize, I didn't put these clothes on, right? So you look down and you're a stump. And all you ever had to do is lie on your side and then all the trees would dance around you. And then you notice, oh, there's a person playing a stump over there. There's a person playing a stump over here. But you didn't look at the top of yourself to see that you're actually a tree. And now you look like a fallen tree, right? But it works. It goes along with it. Or maybe you started to smile and really parade, and then the audience started to laugh at you. And then the sort of off the cuff, off the hip interplay with all the kids around you, they started to sort of go around you and gravitate and go along with what you were doing. And you got laughs. And the crowd started to laugh at you, right? And you're just doing this ad-lib sort of shit. Right? But that's how most people live their entire lives. Is that they're just born into this reality, but then others are given the script. Others are extremely aware, and somebody comes out and hands them a violin and they start playing it. And it's just, it's indoctrinated into them, right? And then there's a jealousy of this person has a skill, and it's like, no, they don't. They got downloaded the information. You weren't given the information. And even more so, who knows how many people that are on the planet right now, but let's just go along with the 7.5, 8 billion. They're saying China only has 350 million. This Real Talk with Lee, who's just another fucking plant. It doesn't matter if she doesn't even have a history that can be connected to being a plant. They talk right in people's heads. If you think this is nuts now, then you really aren't paying attention to what the fuck's going on with the voice of God and all this shit that's been around forever. But I think you do. I'm assuming that most people are up to speed on that by now. When I would do videos talking about that many years ago, people just think you're nuts. And who cares what they think? That's the whole point. You're up on this stage, and then when people just go with it, it's like, okay, they think you're nuts, go with that. And then suddenly you're personifying a character, like a Seinfeld character of, oh, I'm nuts. I'm a crazy Jew. I'm arguing with everyone. I'm right, I'm wrong. Right? So certain people are given the script. They're given certain prowess. They're given a process. They're given a way. And those who miss those epic moments where they're supposed to do something, right? There's so many people where I know that I was used initially as a backup or a front runner that refused to do things because of what I was put here to do was extremely specific. And it's not God. There is no God. There is no God here. This is not a God place. And for you to bring God here in the sense of purity, it makes you the most targeted person ever. And they'll bend that and twist that. And the people who actually hear your message and go, oh, this guy's not talking about that he's perfect. He's not talking about he's going after perfection. And the perfection isn't the number one thing. And it's not even the type of perfection that we think that, initially that he's asserting. This is purity, right? When you go toward purity, you transcend the heat of space and time. You transcend the crystalline structure that's postulated with absolute zero. You transcend the gas state and the gas solutions. You transcend the ether. There's nothing that you could reference back that is an aspect of that purity or that purification. Like that's where John Dee got it wrong, right? That's where who was it? Jacob Boehme that I just put up. That's where he got it wrong. That's where Spinoza got it wrong, right? That's where all these people got it wrong. They thought the principles could be found here. They can't. But that's why the stones, the principles are cherished. Because you found them and they don't exist here. So they exist in you. And that purity doesn't mean you're going to be pure. Of course you're going to be impure. If you're still alive, you're impure. If you have a roof over your head, you're impure. If you're driving in a car, you're impure. You had to do things and sell yourself out to where the only reason you're still here is because you were akin to that mother deer running off, just as your kin, your very baby who didn't even take its first breath was gobbled up by a Komodo dragon. Right? And many people live in this oversensitized place, right? And others got very dull in the fact that I could have thousands of babies, I wouldn't give a fuck as long as I'm alive. This is just the way, the nature of oncology. Others would become so sensitized to it that they would hide, right? And then by hiding, they would never get impregnated. And even the act of impregnation was an entirely, you could say, oh, the fatty deer was the most selfish piece of shit. That's where a lot of feminists lie. And it's like, they're victim to their ontology too. And it's like, I don't believe that. not victims. And it's like, guess what? We're all fucking remote control, and guess what you're doing? You're falling into the trap, Virginia Woolf. But it's not to take anything from people like Ayn Rand or others, because it's like, look, people aren't conscious. They're not capable of conscious decision making. And it does lead back to this deterministic aspect, right? And yet that's not what's really happening. In the moment, you're suddenly given the wheel. In that moment, where you could careen off, it's going, oh, here, it's laughing at you. It's like the devil, it's like Kurt Russell, that Quentin Tarantino movie. What was that? Death Ride or whatever the fuck. That was so many years ago I watched that, but that was such a great movie because it was like, there you are, you're trapped in this car and you're essentially trapped in there with this devil, right? With this Satan figure. And you don't realize it, but you're about to get, you're about to die by the forces of nature. You will not live. And then all of a sudden, gives the devil, Satan, Lucifer, however you want to refer to it as, but these are not the same thing, just like Ahriman is not the same as Lucifer. So there are different codified states, and even arms, or an armature, a fork of directionality that these personas break off into, and they are 4 distinct personas. And when people begin to get overly arbitrary, that's where Ahriman and the Ahrimanic energy comes in. Is where, suppose you put on an arbitrary hat, and you began to see things, again, the mother deer. What if the mother deer realized itself as all consciousness through this animism and began to see things in a very perspicacious, ontological, and intellectual way, and realized, fuck, I can't escape the physicality. I could hop, I could jump, I've tried it all before. Here I am anchored, I got this umbilical cord coming out, right? I mean, it's like, I'm exhausted, what the fuck am I gonna do? And so the self begins to assert itself, right? And to think in a very arbitrary way, like, well, this is life, right? I'm not gonna carry this guilt around. I'm gonna become the arbiter. I'm going to become the one that creates a stop up in the dam. I'm going to create these dams, right? Instead of there being enough water to flow through to that cascade waterfall that allowed those at the drinking well to become prey to any predators, especially the Komodo dragon in this area. I'm just going off here. I'm not trying to be geographically accurate. Instead of doing that, I'm going to stop this fucking thing up, right? And become the arbiter. I'm going to be the one who's thinking ahead and saying, if I can, in my little deer mouth or my antelope mouth, I'm going to place one rock over here and walk back and forth. And whether or not this motherfucker tries to impregnate me, I'm not thinking about anything but my fucking work, right? So that's like this Ahrimanic mind of, I'm gonna control the fucking spigot. I don't care if this kills subsets of thousands of species and insects, right? If it changes the entire geography of it, right? When you get into Luciferianism, it's to say, yeah, but what if you acknowledge the fact that you are now the God that stands over this whole valley? By you doing this, you can leverage this to where you can call down and speak to another antelope down there in the valley and say, I'm up here and you can't get up here and you're too fucking stupid to get up here. And guess what? I control the spigot to your water. Now, if you want some, you're gonna have to do something for me, right? And it's like, I want to kill the fucking Komodo dragon. It's like, how are we supposed to do that? These Komodo dragons will kill us. It's like, okay, well, I'll tell you about it. And then this leads over to Satan, right? Because the architect of the universe, it's going to lay out the architecture, but it's not going to lead out the way, right? And when you get into the way, you have two ways to go. You have the Jesus way, and you have the Satan way. So Jesus oddly arrives after all these, the Jews, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, right? Oddly arrives after all that's in play. Turns over some tables, but doesn't necessarily, from a very stoic sense, kind of accepts things as they are, but rails against them in his own personal nature on ontology to reject it. But then you get into Satan, and Satan says, look, all right, I have control over you. I've commissioned you to kill the Komodo dragon specifically. But how could we use the Komodo dragon and bend the Komodo dragon to our will, knowing that you slighted me, knowing that you ate my offspring, knowing that that's how I would come into the world and be born over and over again through this fucking Nietzschean flat time. Now, I will become your God, and anything that you get, you will get through me, right? And then you begin to see the morphological aspect to how this deer starts to look a lot like a fucking goat, right? Starts to look a lot like Baphomet, right? Nature has figured out a way through intellect, but divisiveness, to say I'm going to be cunning. And so when you get into witchcraft, that's exactly what this is. But it's not only witchcraft. Then you have those who are warlocks who supplicate to that, simply because the woman learns that, of course, this beast, this man, this beast in man, this man and beast is going to try and do all these things to me, try to impregnate me. You know, he's stronger, more ignorant, right? I mean, all these things that, say, a feminist asserts. Well, that female learns that when she bats her eyes and sort of starts to play around and seduce this person, and then says, no, not right now. But I want it. Oh, you want it, and that's good. Here, I'll cook you some food, right? I'll build you up. Right? And then you go, oh yeah, asparagus and steak, and right? And then in that lovemaking process, learns, you gotta pull out. Through that lovemaking process, learns, while I'm making love to this person and they're weak, at their weakest moment, I can say, your friend is trying to turn against you. Your friend tried to have sex with me, even though she's the one that batted her eyes and probably did it on purpose, or not. Doesn't really matter, right? Not to them, as long as they're in control. So you start to see this power between the druids and the witches, where then the bizarre thing that happened is that the druids, which aren't removed from the Kabbalistic Jews, from the Talmud, became homos. They did. They became homos. It was any divisive way that they could break off from. So you had the rabbis in a home where their fucking wives were fucking witches. They had access to all this shit. You know, what do you think the Kabbalah is all about? Kabbalistic magic. Why do you think people like Madonna take to it? Right? So you have the weakness of the rabbi. And even more so, you get these very corrupted people out of this, the succession of lineage, where this is birthed and born in, and it's the odd thing is that it's codified into them through ritualization, through these rituals, these red rite rituals, all these other rituals. There's so many rituals, and you have this battle that's occurring, like Joyce Meyer's, the battlefield of the mind. This is the side you're on. You're born with balls. Doesn't matter how small those balls are, right? It doesn't mean you have to choose a brotherhood. But it does mean that you're on this side, they're on that side. And you can pretend, you can choose that that's not the way it is, but it is. And most people don't wake up to this fact until much later. And some of them are downloaded information. And nobody's given the same chance. Nobody's given the same. There's no promise there. Right? So you have this unwritten law, this unwritten code, this religion, this cult that everyone's practicing, everyone's following, and nobody will acknowledge. Even though it's costing countless people's lives, even though it's taken over the military, even though it's taken over the political organizations and is part of the political process. Politics, policies, police, it's all the same thing. Polemics, it's all war, because we're born into war. And it's the acknowledgement that you were born into war, and that there is a war. And there's a war because you stand for something. And to be a pacifist and say there is no war, it doesn't make the war go away. In fact, it just makes you an instrument that can be used. So it's a form of violence, and that's what they do, is they try to take away your violence. Now, only when you reach a state, right? And this does gets into Nietzsche. It does get into the Ubermensch. It does get into the Overman, because it is when you realize that the cunning aspect of survival and survivability means to brandish and to take on a certain way, and you can either play the game, and so that's what money is made out of. Money has that dollar bill has an eye on it, and that my son asked me the other day about, does all money have an eye of like providence on it? It's like, no, because it doesn't have to. That's the whole reason that the US dollar does what it does. That's why it is that shade of green. That's why BRICS is having to fight against it. It's because there is something very spiritual for that currency. It's a current of energy. That currency is what people supplicate to and bow down to over and over again. It's that community, that false community aspect of a coven. It is a coven. It is a coterie. And if anything, the banking system, that's not the way the male mind works. So when you get into Lucifer, you get into the fact that Lucifer understood this, and that Ahriman and Satan are Lucifer's arms, right? So the light of being. So Ahriman is this dictatorial, arbitrary banking system, which really is the right hand of Lucifer, because it's like, well, we'll let you live, but like crime and punishment, you're going to be paying heavy dividends just to survive. And then over here on the left, it's, you want to join up? Well, this is what we do. You have to discount, not deny, but use those who feel that the true religion is purification and purity. Well, we're going to sacrifice those people. We want them to stay pure. We want them to live in this illusion. So therefore, we want Christianity to function. And even more so, we need to have a wing or an arm that says, oh, we prefer this. Let's even create a Bible out of this. Even though the Freemasonry is a whore. It's a prostitute, right? So it's a collection of a brotherhood to say, well, the battle is displayed with the Hellfire Club and Benjamin Franklin, right? And what the Illuminati was attempting to do. It was attempting to bring things into the mainstream and to say, look, there has to be a religion. There has to be a sophisticated measure where people aren't born that stupid, right? So now they're literally trying to make people stupid, born stupid, with no epigenetic knowledge, no foreknowledge, no information, no intellect. They're born dumb as fuck. They remain dumb as fuck. And they're considered sheeple or cattle, right? And they're actually eaten. Cannibals' Kitchen's real. And the struggle and the injustice, if you will, is how far can we take this? And then you begin to see it, and the doctrine is, oh, you have the unwritten doctrine. You have the essence of what the ninth point is, right? And this is why 9 is depicted as so evil. Like even when you do this, look, 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, right? 13, 21. When you count 0. You don't actually have to count 0, but 0 is monad. Right? There is no 0. Something became something. Something compounded on something. Your exponentials. I've gone over this over and over again. Phi or the phi or the Fibonacci or the golden mean, it can't unfold into a 1 unless it began with something that was complete. Therefore, all that's happening is that which appears to be beyond the decimal point or inverted is now extroverted. But it's only extroverted because you're over here. You're actually in the bubble. That's the truth of the situation, is that we're not free. And freedom comes from the violence and the refuting of the destruction of all that is bad, all that is evil. So what they want you to do is they want you to love something here. And what is loving something here? Here. That draws you back in. Because you're like, they're innocent. My child's innocent. My child doesn't know. And that's why educating them is the first step. But will they ever understand what we're talking about here? Even if you studied this, even if it was taught in the mainstream, the message would be lost to most people, by most people. It's the type of thing that it only has the type of impact that it does when it's so antithetical to the way you think, to what you think life is, to what you think life should be. So there are many people who go, oh, this is bullshit. Why does this happen? Why can't we just live in peace and harmony, this and that? And it's like, because you know what you would do? If you could convince everybody to live in peace and harmony, you would be a person who wants what you want. You want your house. What if everybody goes, we agree with you, and they took everything from you and you were the only homeless person there and they all laughed at you? And you're like, it was my idea. Was it? So look, in order for you to advance, you're forced into the violence. You gain a broader picture of the scalability. You can freeze time with your intellect. You can back up. You can zoom in. You can even begin to understand what the Komodo dragon in this depiction thinks like and does, and how they operate and how they came to be, right? You can travel through time. You're a part of the infinite mind. You see the connection and the connectability and forking off of essential consciousness. That the Komodo dragon didn't choose to be what or who or how it presupposed itself. It was just surviving. That's how it was born. It was born with an appetite. So then when you begin to look at it, you see that the appetite itself, from a Buddhist perspective, is the criminal. That is the criminalization of the self. That you had to kill something and eat it from the beginning. That even the deer eating the brush and shrubbery or berries or whatever the fuck it's eating, from a vegetarian sense, even though it seemed to be removed from, and a lot of people do this with veganism and vegetarianism. They really believe that they're not killing anything, that they're not sacrificing anything. It's like, oh, look, they nut and they're floral and they're this and that, and it's like, yeah, but you can't live off of that. You can't thrive off of that. Why do you think the Komodo dragon is what it is? You can't exhibit violence when you have to. And that's really what the animal kingdom teaches us. Then you have the giraffe, right? Which is a very powerful animal. And the odd thing is these aren't naturally, I do not believe in evolution. I do not believe these animals evolved. I firmly believe that they were engineered. I always have. And they are to tell us a story about ourselves. So many times, in so many ways. Right? Where you see the dance, and then even more, you see the feebleness. That you see the feebleness. You see how this animal seems stupid, but they have an understanding. You put a paintbrush with an like supposedly these elephants who can paint are actually abused. That's a whole nother area. Because weren't we abused? Weren't we abused into an ontological thought process? The fact that we came into consciousness at all and could be conscious, you're pretty much forced there. It's through pain. Right? It really is. And some people you could say, oh, Mozart. And it's like, that was one of the most fucked up, crazy people that ever existed. But were they intoxicated on, not only intoxicated on the hubris of what they could deliver, but able to stay within the pericosum of their own psychology, right? But none of them were well. You better believe Da Vinci wasn't a well person either. They had to take more than the lion's share to operate, to think. They weren't just born a certain way. And so this gets into something that's very interesting that Operation GCD was talking about the other night when they were talking about Nicolas Cage with Cosmic Peach. Really interesting conversations, but they're going, you know what? After us doing this sort of program killer series and looking deep into these people and then seeing like Ocala and Ed Edwards on these game shows and how not just amicable, but like, debonair and likable and charismatic they were, right? They were these charismatic people, right? Or Ted Bundy, right? And to really look at this and go, they seem to have cracked a code, you could say. And then it's like, well, was the code cracked in them or were they cracked, right? And so what they started to bring up the other night was they would be surprised if Nicolas Cage was a fucking serial killer. Like when you put together all these Kevin Spacey, he just got away with all this shit, right? It's not really funny. Charlie Sheen being a fucking rapist. I mean, these people, look. He's still rich, and it's like, look, you got away with it. You're still alive. Who are you now? And isn't that the defining thing? It's like, who are you going to be now? Now that you know you did all these dastardly things, that you made it, you weren't really thinking about it, but you went through the process. Just like the Process Church, you went through the process. Who are you now? Right? And that's where I came to is like, look, no matter where you are, there is one religion. And that pervading religion in the world, that's not the end all. It's the inversion and the antithesis and the juxtaposed position of what isn't here. What is hunted, what is sacrificed, what is used as the nectar of the gods, what is fueling everything, what does everyone crave, what's at the center of it? It's purity, purification. Purification and purity is at the center, it's at the hub of everything. It's what makes everything function. And you will never find it here. And when you become more pure and purified and choose purity, then you stop doubting yourself, stop breaking yourself apart, stop looking at the path you came in on and say, yeah, I realize all that is how you see me, the character of me, how you identify me, the abstract of you seeing me and me being a persona and a personality, a straw man. I'm not any of those things. And I know that the true religion, if there is any, and religion is just the epistemology of how something begins
and what it manifests to be. And really, this is a hint at, look, once it flowered and became, it doesn't exist here. In fact, it's killed off. So that it can't pass through the line of succession. It can't hide. There's no religious, there's nothing happening in the Vatican or in the catacombs under the cities or harmonically being driven. It's all the antithesis of purity and purification. It is the sacrifice and the killing and even the teaching of, well, something that wants to be pure is so ignorant and will continue to be ignorant. We got to get them younger and younger and more oblivious like animals, and we have to sacrifice and kill them because we are above them, and we realize that this is the true cult, right? And that's I mean, you could say it's higher than 99.9% of people, and that's what defines someone like that's posited or postured as a Jesus character. And in our character, we have no character. In our character, we do the wrong thing. We always will. We're in a sin suit. We live in a sin prison. We live in a sin world. And we're always going to make the wrong choice, wrong decision, but something in us that either recognizes purity or does not. And you'll even hear it. People go, well, what is pure? That's nothing. And it's like, you just displayed how you think, how you regard, what you really think, what you're really about. Right? Because the slave morality is there for a very good reason. So imagine that. Imagine a society that woke up. Imagine a peoples that woke up, and they woke up to the fact that for the most part, they realize they are pure and that they have to protect purity. They have to teach purity, and they have to expound on purity in every aspect of who and what they are. From their diet, to the religious practices, to the way they build, to the mathematics they use, everything had to come down to this fundamental, pure burgeoning or beginning. Well, guess what? The beasts will be born. Right? The Freemasons will be born. The Templars will be born. The witches will be born. The seducers, the capitalists. What do you do then? And what you realize is only in the self, and only in the recognition of purity within the self, can it exist. I think I was listening to a little bit of the writings of Chardin last month. Bohm. Obviously other people like David Hume that are talking about probity and principles and so forth. And when you get into this, there has to be an astute realization of this, and you have to be able to take this beyond conceptualization. But you can't ever get to a place where you accept that this is the end all be all and that purity doesn't exist anywhere. But that by you believing in it, by you having faith in it, by you meditating it into this world, that it does challenge all mainstream notions. And that if enough people genuinely felt this, a transcendence would occur. But even more so, there can't be a gullible aspect in the acceptance that everyone and anyone has a pure aspect to them. And that is a very hard truth to come to. Because it means that
people that are born in your lineage, especially friends, family, obviously, and the society that we live in is entirely evil and born impure. It's not a meshing. It's not an inner meshing and a matrix where you have centralized pure hubs and you have those that are impure, and it just happens to be this right and left flux. That's not what's happening here. There's a definite, discernible difference between the two sides. They can't cohabitate. They don't create a unison. It isn't an absolute hot and absolute cold situation or a gas measured solution. It is, in fact, a completely different paradigm, a completely different universal construct. And you have to begin to see that this reality, if you want to call it that lives off of purity, is a parasitic cosmos. It's a cosmos that's built on, like I say, the Komodo dragon, eating, tearing apart, living off of the closest to purity, right? In a pure moment. And ironically, like when you look at Zach King, that's what he talked about doing when he was a teenager. I think a preteen, he was talking about how he, high priest of Satanism, ritualization, to not only kill, but kill and eat his firstborn. Can you imagine that? And so you get into the dark aspects of this, that it's like you have to be aware of what you're doing. And anyone who could do that would be killing themselves. And you come into this awareness, you can't set yourself up. You made a mistake from the beginning, and you will maintain yourself. You are not going to come back here, and if you do, it's going to be supremacy. It's a violent action that you will maintain who you are, and you're not going to go through this weird Rosicrucianism where you switch sexes and all this other bullshit that they like to fucking play. You ain't fucking letting go of yourself. And who you are is who you are, and what you are is what you are. And if you discovered this, then you are forever. You are forever, everywhere, all the time. And so it brings about this idea of violence, because ultimately, that's why we were born into war. They want you to think that you're the one igniting the war by refuting everything of this world. But the war was happening long before you came along. We're played like a card, and you've always been, and I've always been. So let's see. It is. So 2 hours. We're going to go to 3 hours. We're going to go to 3 hours. Goes by quick. You stick with one method, one way. And really, honestly, you're given that way. And
there is no other way. You're just given one way through. And it's what you do with it. So I'm at a crossroads right now. Yeah, and the reintroduction of carbohydrates has been cool. I've liked that. Just focusing on rice alone, coming off of ketosis, carnivore, man, it really gave me a great perspective on how to control it, what to expect, how to control it, how to carbo load, and then having all those nutrients available. Like today, all I had was beef liver. I just had a small amount of beef liver. We're going to continue on with that. I would be doing probably a combination of, like, if I could just decide anything, it'd probably be a combination of broccoli and spinach. And that still wouldn't even come close to what beef liver allows me to have as far as just a one power hit superfood. I gotta build. What I noticed is people are missing that fact. Okay? They're missing the fact that building as opposed to losing. You never want to get into a mind state of losing things. You want to get into a mind state of building. I think we're going to call it a video here, just so I have access to my phone. I have my phone plugged in actually, and I'm going to test a couple things out, but I'm going to keep walking.